welcome back everybody to another episode of the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge Podcast with your host, as always, myself, Alex Connor, where, we talk about everything training, nutrition, and lifestyle with a more three-dimensional view. And this week I'm with Brandon Schultze, and he's joining me all the way from Canada. I've got my shirt off, guys. You're going to have to deal with that because it's about 1,000 degrees here in Australia for the local listeners. But back in your end of the world, my friend, it's completely different. Brandon, thanks for joining me. What's the weather like over there? Paint us a picture.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's it's cold. It's cold right now. We had a nice winter so far, but just over the past week, it's hit like -20 or so, and freezing. Car starting not as well as it used to. So not like I can really go anywhere, but
Yeah, it's a bit like that, isn't it? Obviously, we've got a little bit more freedom, in this part of the world at the minute. A lot of my friends and associates, practitioners, including yourself, getting it a little bit tougher, but making the most of it. And I guess, it's funny because a lot of Australians, they seem to gravitate towards Canada and vice versa. I've got lots of Canadian friends here. It seems to be this whole like switcheroo, which is pretty cool. It's so different, but there are so many similarities. I feel the culture is very welcoming and people are very relaxed and calm over there.
Yeah, like I can't speak to that necessarily, but anyone who I've met is like, they're almost like the friends that I already have, like laid back, chill, to see the world in this way that, it's not always, serious, and just enjoy life as it comes.
Yeah, man. I think that's a really good, simple way of putting it, right? I mean, ultimately, that is it. The best answer on what to do with your life yet. Enjoy
Yeah,
it. And if that's what you
exactly.
get out of the podcast, you've done well. But I'm sure there's a lot more value. Brandon, as always, give some context to the listeners, people who may not be familiar with you. Tell us, who you are, what you do, and of course, more importantly, why you do it. Take your time. It can be as short or as intricate as you like.
So as Alex said, my name's Brandon. I'm a strength coach and an Oxygen Advantage instructor here in Canada. There's only a few of us for the Oxygen Advantage out there in Canada. I think there's about 13 or so. So we're pretty few and far between. But I kind of got into this because, getting up in high school, just wanted to feel better, look better, the typical reasons why you go to the gym. And then, I kind of realized that it's so much more than just, looking better, the mental benefits and whatnot. I've got injured in high school as, not lifting properly. And I've had to go through, some injuries myself. And it's made me appreciate that having someone to coach you through something like that can be very beneficial. And I think for myself, I wanted to be able to, not only coach people through injury, but also help them do what they can to not get injured in the first place. It's something that I wish that I had growing up myself. And very much so. That's kind of why I do what I do. I just want to help people in all aspects of their life.
For sure. And I think that's at the core of, any good coach with great ethics and values. I mean, ultimately, we just enjoy helping people in the line of work that we have a fascination and a healthy curiosity for, which is usually spurred on by an experience earlier in our lives. What was a protagonist? Because obviously, we're going to talk about all things, within this realm, but breathing is going to be a bit of a topical point for us, and oxygen.
Yeah.
How did you stumble across that element? And was there any person, influence, memory, like obviously with the rehabilitative side of things, that inspired you to dig a little bit deeper in that area before we kind of unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I first got into this kind of industry, um, obviously education was a very important thing to me. I didn't go to university formally for training or exercise education or anything like that, or kinesiology, whatever you call it, in different parts of the world. But uh, I took after I took a personal training diploma in my hometown. I realized that there was just a lot of knowledge that was not given out. So you have to go out and search for that knowledge and take courses in education and stuff. That's something I'm sure you're familiar with, and people listening, I'm sure, can resonate with as well. So I found a certification, and it was one of those certifications that are offered through Good Life, and it kind of had a lasting impact on me. But one of the first things that they talked about was the importance of breathing. And I learned about the oxygen advantage through there. So this was a couple years ago now. And, you know, I started implementing it, and I started seeing some improvements in my clients' lives. Now, from there, I would say, like, I didn't really pay it much attention. And then I sort of got involved with some of the guys over at Prescript, you know, the Jordan Shallow, and I had heard him on a podcast about a year after I took that course, and he was talking about breathing, and I was like, hey, wow, this is something that, like, I find interesting. I implement, but not to a high level. And I was like, you know, I think this is the direction that I want to take my career, and I want to, you know, double down on, because it's something that is so sort of forgotten if you think about it, right? Because, you know, we breathe on autopilot all day long, right? And it's something that's kind of just overlooked in the industry and in life. So I took it upon myself to go to the Oxygen Advantage, go to Patrick McKeown himself, and I started their advanced instructor certification. And from there, it's just same story.
Yeah, there's a good point though you make about it's something that's become so autonomous, and we take it for granted, but it's so pivotal. The other, I guess, element that springs to mind, to use a comparison, is sleep. Which, wow, we won't go down that rabbit hole today, but once again, super powerful, something that you just have to do, and it happens even if you resist it, just like breathing. But yet we don't really understand it as much as we should, as much as there's more studies coming out on it. And I think breathing is one of those key elements where it's like, okay, it's something we're going to do, it's something we naturally do, but if we change it, understand it, and we implement it well, we can have these massive impacts. And I guess that's something I really want to unpack with you. So I guess before we, again, pick at it, unpack it, dive deeper, I guess from a mechanistic point of view, could you explain for the listeners breathing more from the physiological sense? And you can keep it as simple or as complex as you want, and we'll sort of streamline it where, you know, what are the mechanisms that are happening in breathing, if that is something that is important to the definition of being able to breathe, you know, better. And I guess just giving a bit of context, or maybe some of the words that were used throughout this podcast, so people can understand when you're saying, you know, maybe inhalation, exhalation, things like that, some basics. And then people go, okay, I know what he's talking about here. And then they can start to perhaps implement and understand it a little bit more. I think definition is always key before we dive into a subject. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack as well, right? Like, we could probably spend 2 hours just talking about that, or a whole day talking about just the physiological responses. But I think one of the big things that I'm going to talk about is just the functional breathing pattern training kind of stuff that the Oxygen Advantage dives into. Mm-hmm. You know, things like this proper breathing patterns, you know, it improves blood circulation, oxygen delivery to the cells, right? Through nasal breathing, we can dilate the upper airways of the nose, the lower airways in the lungs, reduce, you know, in exercise-induced bronchorestriction, you know, like you mentioned, sleep, focus, concentration. All of those things have a big part to play in the benefits of breathing, for sure. So I think understanding that nose breathing or nasal breathing is where we all have to start in order to really proceed with the breathing stuff. And, you know, if that's not taken care of, then really nothing else works well.
Okay.
Yeah. So thinking about the way we breathe through the nose is obviously important for us to look at.
Yeah, let's dive down that. That's something I wanted to chat to you about. I've recently discovered that I'm definitely a mouth breather, which me being a perfectionist is like, got to change this one, got to change it real fast, not good. But it makes sense because, I've always someone who's not done well in air conditioning or even waking up with a dry mouth and a blocked nose, someone who's got quite a sensitive nose. And I think we might even cover this as well. I think some people may need, I don't know if it's true, but surgery. Some people have got adenoids or whatnot, or can't do it.
Yeah.
But I've always sort of struggled with that area. And I look back over my life and think about, what I've gone through with breathing. And it's nothing major, but I'm like, oh, it's starting to make sense now. And even like from the dental point of view as well, I had to have braces and all that. And I think it'd be great if we could just, I guess, talk about that fact, because that's pretty mind blowing as it is. But let's dive down that road of nasal breathing, whatever context you feel like we need to, and obviously streamlining it in a way where we can unpack whatever you think, I guess, the critical areas are, given the time that we have on the podcast, Brandon. And maybe we may do a part 2 at some point as well and unpack it a little bit further, because I think this is more important than people realize.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when you first come out of the womb, like, you physically can't breathe out of your mouth. Like, so I think that's something important to think about, because, we weren't doing it when we were first coming out of the womb. So why should we be mouth breathing, right now? There was a book that I read, and it was, it's called Shut Your Mouth and Save Your Life by George Catlin. And it was really interesting to me because he had followed, or he had done some research into some of the indigenous tribes and spent time with them. And he found that even them, like being these completely recluse tribes, they would, the mothers of the children would actually pinch the children's mouths closed when they started to breathe through their mouth. So it's like these remote, tribes knew what to do, but somehow we've lost sort of all capability of that going forward, growing up.
Very primal.
Yeah, very primal, exactly. And that's something that I talk about a lot too, is that it's breathing as a primal movement. It's one of the first things, again, for what do you do when you first come out of your womb? You take your first breath on your own. Now going down the nasal breathing route, it's like I say that, obviously it's more important, or it's the most important thing, and that if that's not taken care of, then nothing else can really be taken care of well, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is there's a couple reasons. So the first one that we see is nasal nitric oxide. And I say nasal nitric oxide because nitric oxide is produced in the body naturally, but through the nose, if we can stimulate and we can breathe a little bit slower, we can stimulate nitric oxide production into the paranasal sinuses, and that not only helps unblock your nasal passages, so just the act of breathing through your nose can unblock your nose, which makes it easier to then breathe through your nose. But
this is good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the big thing as well. And then it also has another couple benefits of nitric oxide will also improve blood oxygen perfusion in the lungs. It also it's actually a natural antibacterial. So there's actually, for COVID especially, it's kind of relevant now, but they're doing UK or trials in the UK with nitric oxide nasal spray. Now they're not really talking about the fact that we can produce that naturally in the nasal passages, but it just goes to show you how kind of important it is for the prevention of disease and whatnot, especially when it's a line of defense. Right. The other couple benefits that you see is that it's a restriction to airflow, which is important for breathing in slower, actually using your diaphragm efficiently, and increasing carbon dioxide, which is something that we call the Bohr effect, which we can talk about later too.
Cool.
And then also it warms and humidifies incoming air, so you don't get that bronchoconstriction that breathing through your mouth can cause as well. Right? You say you wake up with a dry mouth, and one of the main things with nasal breathing and versus mouth breathing is that the water loss itself is about 42%. This so far what research says. I don't know if it's actually true. I've never studied it, but water loss can be reduced by 42% just by nasal breathing itself.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I guess that only from a hydration perspective, that's a big impact. But even somewhere in Australia, like a warmer climate, that's going to really leave you dehydrated. And yeah, it is. It's something that I guess as of recently listening to your podcasts with Jordan and, speaking to a couple of friends, as I mentioned before we got started, who brought this to my attention a little bit more. And I'm someone who is always, humble in the fact that there is more to learn, and I'm very curious, hence my podcast. And I think there's definitely improvements, and I really want to get a grasp on this, and not just for myself, but for my clients, for the people in my circle of influence. And I guess the really knee-jerk reaction now, and perhaps we need to unpack it a little bit more in other areas, but is how do you, as you said, start with nasal breathing? How do you start to do this? Is it, obviously people are going to be quite shocked to go put tape on your mouth at night, but there's a process and a procedure to this. Someone has said to me, hey, just start doing it during the day when you work. What are some of your, I guess, steps with the people you work with to get them effectively nasal breathing as soon as possible in a way that is, it's sustainable and it's going to be a nice sort of gradual process? Obviously, people are going to be a little bit different. Can you talk us through that, please, Brandon?
Yes, absolutely. That nasal breathing, like I said, just so important. I've had clients myself with, that come to me just specifically for breathing. And I've had one client in particular that comes to mind, and I know Patrick McEwen has gone through this himself, but client has gone through surgeries, multiple surgeries. He's going through dental procedures and stuff like that to correct some of the stuff that arises from mouth breathing or chronic mouth breathing. But at all this time, no medical professional has ever told them just to breathe through their nose. Okay. And like I alluded to with the nitric oxide, simply breathing through the nose is one of the most important things. Mm-hmm. So step one, I would say, is just be self-aware. Notice your breathing patterns at all hours of the day, and try and breathe through your nose as much as you can. Now, if you have troubles breathing, obviously do what you can. But if you can breathe through your nose for a minute, chances are you can probably breathe through your nose for life. So there's some nasal unblocking exercises that we can do. Something really simple everyone can do. You simply take a normal breath in through the nose, out through the nose. You can pinch your nose, and then you can pace back and forth, or you can nod your head as you're holding your nose. And this stimulates that buildup of nasal nitric oxide. Now, you hold that for as long as you possibly can. You take a breath in. That nitric oxide is sent directly through your nasal passages to unblock, and do about 5 reps of that. And that can be one of the things that you actionably can do if you have trouble with, a blocked nose. And then from there, it's just making sure you breathe through your nose as much as you can. That's really it. That's really the most important thing, is just being aware enough to catch yourself and to try and breathe through your nose. And I know you alluded to like taping your mouth as well. That's something I prescribe, and I obviously recommend. But like you said, there's a kind of a process to that. So you got to start with the breathing and being able to breathe consistently through your nose during the day. Otherwise, you're just gonna suffocate during the night, and you're gonna want to rip the tape off.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're interested in taping your mouth, or if that's something you want to do, I would say try it about 15 minutes before bed. You don't need to start with a full mouth tape. You can start with just a little bit in the middle of your lips. So just in case you need to revert to some mouth breathing, that's okay. It's perfectly fine. But yeah, just get comfortable with the experience of breathing through your nose day to day.
What kind of tape should you use, apart from perhaps obviously not duct tape? It sounds like a silly question, but obviously putting something abrasive on a soft part of the skin can be a little bit intrusive. And I asked my friend this, and he goes, that's actually a really good question. And he recommended medical tape, or the soft tape that you can get from the chemist. But I don't know if you would recommend anything specifically, because I know that was one of my questions. I'm like, okay, what tape do we use here? Perforation, etc.
Yeah, there's it's really your choice. I've heard of people using just that kind of kinesiology tape, or that athletic kind of tape. When I tape my mouth, which is quite often because I've, it's from childhood. I've had to get some dental work done to correct some mouth breathing because, I was never told. But I use there's a company called, I think it's Simply Breathe. It used to be lip seal tape, but now I think it's called Simply Breathe. That's one that will cover the whole mouth, just a little piece of tape that looks like a mustache almost.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, that works. That's the stuff that I use. But if you're looking for a non-intrusive one, the one that I recommend to most of my clients, if they're hesitant, is through the Oxygen Advantage or the Buteco Clinic. You can get something called myotape, and myotape is a physiotherapy tape, but it goes around the mouth, so it actually just works to close your mouth, but there's still that way out without having to rip the tape off.
Sure.
Okay, so it's basically a big circle around your mouth, and those are the ones that I would recommend.
For sure. I might try and find those links and put them in there. But I know it's probably pivotal. Getting something which is a little bit more, I guess, flexible, leading into that. But as you said, obviously starting before bed, even just learning to breathe through your nose in general is going to be really critical. Now, obviously, this is going to be very individualized, so I don't expect a definitive answer for this one. But how long did it take you, or how long did it generally take your clients who were mouth breathers, most of their life, to be able to integrate this and actually make it autonomous? And is it something that once you do, it generally stays that way? Or is it like a lot of skills where you have to keep practicing and you might, like you just alluded to, continue to use this tape from time to time to ensure that you are, still nasal breathing throughout the night, throughout the day?
Yeah. It does get better and more automatic. Typically, it can be, I've seen clients improve very quick and hold on to it for a long time. One thing that I've noticed is that when a client does start and we work our way through the program for about a month or a month and a half, 2 months, when they do stop, or if they do, fall off the wagon a little bit, it never goes back to as worse as it was when they started, which is good. However, I think it is something that we need to, kind of keep up with every once in a while. I don't know if necessarily you need to do them every single day. After we've got your Bolt score to a point, which we can talk about later, but we got to a point where it's considered functional. But yeah, I would say about a month to 2 months, then it starts to get a little bit more autonomic. And then, and then for me right now, I only tape my mouth if I notice I wake up in the morning with a dry mouth. I'll be like, all right, well, I should next bedtime, I'll tape my mouth and hopefully it'll fix the problem.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess that's a big giveaway as well with that side of things.
Sure.
Another point perhaps to bring up, you were on about exercises before that you could do. I've done a little bit of yoga over the past 2 years for flexibility and mindfulness, amongst other things. But one of the exercises that we sometimes do is blocking one side of the nose and breathing through alternate sides. I don't know if that has any benefit based on the science that you're aware of, or if there is any other exercises like that have any merit to do, or whether it is perhaps a little bit more on the spiritual side of things, shall we say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's I think that's, what is that, pranayama or something like that,
is
right?
Correct. Yeah, they use those terms, that the language, I think it's, what is it? I don't know, it's from an Indian, but they have the actual, all of the proper authentic names, which is, but yes, that rings a bell. Yeah,
I think that's what it is. But yeah, I would say that's definitely one of the things that's important. I think breathing is one of the first things that you learn really in yoga, and I think it's fantastic. Yeah, doing that kind of alternated nasal breathing, as well as, I kind of mentioned that breathing through the nose itself is kind of a reduction to airflow. But if you can reduce it even further, then there's some benefits there, like I said, with the nasal nitric oxide and stimulating that parasympathetic nervous system, which is important for yoga as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Before we segue into the Bolt scores and a few other of those concepts, I wouldn't mind spending a little bit of time, apart from the principles you've already mentioned, slaying some of the biggest misconceptions about breathing, and perhaps on the opposite side of that, highlighting some of the, I guess, the most interesting, fun, but critical factors about breathing for people listening that are very sort of, okay, this is some context, this is some real quick rapid fire takeaways that, including, I guess, maybe we go down and talk about, how important it is for dental development and oral health, etc., and some of which you've already alluded to. But it would be cool to kind of bullet point a couple of those things if possible, or whatever you see fit, that you would say, hey, look, if I've only got a limited amount of time, here's some of the biggest misconceptions, here's some of the biggest benefits, or like, wow, that's very, very interesting. Because I know people always hang on to those, and that can be the, I guess, the elixir for change a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some of the, there's two big misconceptions that I see a lot of the time on the internet. And one is kind of a fear mongering around, you're not using your diaphragm, or you're not breathing with your diaphragm. And that's kind of misleading in a way, right? Like if you've ever been winded and your diaphragm is spasming, like you can't breathe. It's very difficult to breathe. So you're always using your diaphragm. It's just a matter of, how to the extent at which you're using it effectively and to its full range of motion, because the diaphragm's still a muscle. You can still train its full range. So yeah, you're always using your diaphragm, but it's just a matter of the extent to which you're using it. The other thing is, taking a deep breath. There's no definition surrounding that. It's just take a deep breath and everything is going to be okay, when it's actually could be the way you're taking a deep breath could be detrimental to your breathing habits. Now, when I say that, I mean, when I say a deep breath, I say a deep diaphragmatic breath, right? So using your full diaphragm to its potential. And then, whereas most people, when you think a deep breath, you think the amount of air that you're taking in. So you think about taking in a lot of air, which can actually be detrimental to, your breathing. So those are the two kind of misconceptions that I see kind of propounded around the internet a lot.
I want to quickly jump in on that one and go on a bit of a tangent, if that's all right.
Absolutely. I love tangents.
Big mate, I'm great at them. Brilliant. All the listeners are like, here we go. Usually some good that comes out of it. But now I don't know if this was actually Patrick McEwen or someone, obviously someone in the breathing space, but it's a YouTube video, and I watched it yonks ago. And it was a TED talk. And it said, being in the zone all the time. And I was like, this is interesting, right? Obviously, it's a nice clickbait title. And I clicked on this video and it talked about breathing. And I think you may know what I'm talking about. And stop me if it's a load of Cobb's wallet, because we'll slay it. And he said, when people go on stage, when they go do something, they say, hey, break a leg or take a deep breath and relax. And he says, it shouldn't be a deep breath. It should be a rhythmic breath. And he went on to allude about how breathing changes the psychology, and ultimately the physiology controls the psychology, and vice versa. And there's this constant relationship. And ultimately, I'll streamline it for everyone listening, but he went through this process, and I'm not going to go for it because I can't remember all the definitions and key, I guess, lingo, if you like. But it was ultimately creating a ratio and a pacing in your breathing, mainly through nose breathing in and out, where in a situation, and I think this is what you were talking about in terms of the fight or flight response, where if you can tap into that and you can stop yourself, it's, he was sort of like hyperventilating, and he was like, that's, that's a double-edged sword. But if you can try and he says, even if it's like 3-1, 7-2, whatever it is, he goes, if you can just control it again, he goes, usually then your physiology is controlled, which controls the psychology, and you can be very focused. And he was using examples like, being in, say, taking penalties in a World Cup. And I think he actually got someone on the stage, and arithmetic-wise, he threw all these math questions at them, and he measured their breathing, and it was all out of whack. And then he talked about this in front of the person who was still on the stage and said, this is how we do it. And he said, this is what I want you to do. And he did the same thing. And he gave him maths problems, and he was just shouting numbers and confusing him. But he was able to remain composure. Call it a magic trick. But obviously there's something in that. I don't know if you want to speak to that and perhaps clarify those elements if there's any merit to them, but it's something that always stuck with me. But I guess this is a different element perhaps of just the breathing, but it's obviously part of the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. The effect, the underlying effect is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So RSA is kind of one of those things where, you can't really have a good conversation about breathing unless you really talk about RSA.
Okay.
And essentially what this is and it sounds kind of sinister, but as you're breathing, your breath rate is synced to your heart rate. Okay. So when you're inhaling, because you're getting the more oxygen rich air into your lungs, that's going to speed up your heart rate so that it can more efficiently clear that oxygen and get it to your cells. Right now, when you exhale, your heart rate starts to slow down. So if we can get a more rhythmic breath, like you said, and we can get, I typically, like, there's some math behind it, and I will spare the audience the math, but
Oh,
I
I
don't
love
even
Alex.
understand. Yeah, so having a 6 breaths per minute kind of pace, so 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, that's kind of the optimal rate that you should be trying to breathe. Obviously, you can go a little bit more into an exhale, so you can do a 1-to-2 ratio. So inhale for 4, exhale for 8, if you're really wanting to calm yourself down.
Right, that makes
So that
sense.
would be, yeah. So having that rate, right? If you think about the process of hyperventilation, or like when your heart rate starts to increase, right? You can actually tap into that with your breathing, and you can decrease your heart rate simply by slowing down the exhale and having a full exhale, right? So that's going to absolutely calm you down, and it'll help you keep your composure to a certain degree. I know I've worked with that and breath holding. Some with golfers. I don't know if you're a golfer yourself, but I've worked with some golfers, and they felt that when they get to that first tee, it's always the most nerve wracking, right? And you got people watching you, people lined up ready to tee off behind you, and they found that they're very nervous or anxious about messing up. So just getting them to slow their breath down, or just completing a small breath hold, a couple small breath holds, that can sort of tap into that parasympathetic nervous system and calm yourself down a little bit.
Yeah, it's fascinating how we can tap into that. And almost, hack could be a word.
Yeah.
People love hacks, right? But once again, it's not magic. I think it's just understanding the mechanism, being present, and then applying it over time so that you can go, hang on, I can take control of this.
Yeah.
I understand the, I guess, subconscious mechanisms that are going on in the body. But if I have an awareness, I can then perhaps take control of that a little bit more and direct it in a way which is a little bit more advantageous for a more optimal outcome, shall we say.
Absolutely.
But I did dive in on you before. So if you wanted to continue, I think you named 2 points which were the biggest misconception or pivotal. I don't know if you wanted to add on to that or any other interesting facts. If not, we can continue on.
Yeah, I think that was mainly the misconceptions that I wanted to cover. Was there anything else that we were going through with that question? I can't remember.
It was more on the opposite side of it. Interesting, fun, or insightful facts about breathing that most people would be shocked by. And it could even be like, for example, you can talk about the dental element, the oral health element of it, because I know that really blew my mind, especially as I'm going to have one of my best friends. He's a powerlifter. He's also a dentist, but he loves it. He's very, very good at what he does. And he's coming to talk about oral health again, something else that can elongate your life, which sounds ludicrous to say, but when you understand it, it really does. So I thought, okay, that is really, really interesting when you talked about the development of teeth. So perhaps that's something you can unpack, but then there might be other things as well that are very simple, but they leave people going, wow, you know what? That's some food for thought right there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that, you don't really realize until it's too late, right? So if you can if you're listening to this podcast and, you've got kids or whatever, it's something that you can think about. Just like those indigenous tribes I talked about earlier, like tell your kid to breathe through their nose, right? So some of like the dental health stuff is like, obviously there's some like crooked teeth that can happen simply from breathing through your nose, as well as I believe just the bacteria and whatnot in your mouth as well. And that obviously, that correlates to things like cavities or um, uh, gum disease, things like that. The other things you see that are kind of interesting with mouth breathing developmentally is, you can say forward head posture. There's some things, there's some science around that. I don't know how much I'm a believer in posture and whatnot. I think it's very dynamic and it changes. You can adjust that. But there's something there that there is a link between mouth breathing in children and developing that forward head or nerd neck or whatever you want to call it. With children, like I've heard growing up, like the term mouth breather, or right, like I've heard that. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yeah.
And that's a thing, right? Like there is, if you actually look at some longitudinal studies about, there's one in particular. If you look up mouth breathing face, I think on Google, you can actually see a study that followed a child, and you can see that the nose is crooked. You get crooked teeth. Your jaw gets a little bit more set back, and you have a very narrow face. That's one of the things that are linked to mouth breathing in developmental, situations. So it's kind of interesting to see that there is actually some, signs that you do mouth breathe.
Yeah, that is very fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Very much so. And that the dental world is quite, I guess, aware of this more than ever, but they, I guess, not that it's should fall on them to educate everyone, but I feel like it should be something more prevalent. As we talked about at the start, prevention is better than cure. And I guess, you can't help everyone, but if you can provide people with information at that age when they're young, even for parents, say, hey, look, this is something that's not, it's like, hey, brush your teeth once a day. It's a simple thing, like eat your fruit and vegetables. It's not like, okay, breathe through your nose where you can, but here's why. Okay, if you tell people why, you give them purpose, you give them understanding. It's like me just saying, hey, just train your legs. It's like, okay, it might seem pretty obvious, but if I tell you why you should train your legs, and it's more just not from an aesthetic, but a functional perspective, and I give you more definition, you're more likely to do it because now you've got a why, now you've got a purpose. So perhaps there's not for us to put the world to rights there, but I think it would be a great merit to have that information more accessible and out there for people when they're developing. I know I think, that would have been lovely to know, obviously, but hindsight's a great thing within that respect.
Yeah. And I mean, not just dentists either, but like doctors as well. Like I've had, again, I've had clients where they've come to me for breathing and they go to their doctors and, for things like blood pressure, and people aren't looking at breathing patterns for that, or they tell their doctor, oh yeah, I'm doing some breathing work and it's been improving my symptoms, and they're like, all right, well, here's some medication, it doesn't really matter. And and that's okay. There's nothing, like, if they don't know, they don't know, and you can't say anything. But that's where people like you come in, or like me, where we're trying to spread some knowledge around the situation, right? Growing up, I had a retainer that, because you get that kind of narrow jaw, I actually had a retainer that I had to crank every day just slightly, and it widened my jaw. And I didn't know it at the time, but now I do, looking back, and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And clearly that was a developmental thing for me, because I used to mouth breathe and no one told me any different. But I think that onus is, it's getting there. I think people just need to be aware of it.
For sure. I wonder if that, I might experiment on myself with this as well, getting into and becoming more of a nose breather, if at this stage of my life, almost being 30 years old, whether I can still change that physiology, with body fat percentiles. You can appear leaner in the face, but it'd be kind of interesting to see if I notice a change within the jaw, even at my age. I know that I can't remember who it was, but it was someone else who'd got a bridge, and they'd started to nasal breathe, and they had found in their experience that they were also a similar age, that their jaw seemed to be more developed and wider from becoming a nasal breather. I don't know if you have any evidence or knowledge to support that. What are your thoughts if you want to speak to that a little bit, Brandon?
Yeah. I think there is some evidence surrounding that. There's something that, one of those little things, like I talk about nasal breathing every day, but one of those things that also kind of contribute to it is just resting tongue position. So your tongue should be resting on the top of your mouth, the roof of your mouth. And that's one of those things that if you've ever heard of mewing or something like that, it does actually kind of define the jaw a little bit more. So as you breathe and you become more aware of where your tongue is in your body, it does definitely develop the jaw, or more so just reveals what you've already got, essentially, right? And obviously fat levels have some degree to which it affects that, but when you get leaner, yeah, you can definitely tell.
For sure. Well, I'll definitely be doing that because I've always wanted a David Coulthard, Mark Webber jawline for the Formula One connoisseurs around us. It's funny actually because when I was young, you have a bit more fat on the face. Some people develop quite a good jawline early. Again, now knowing this information, this could be possibly why, apart from individualized physiology as it is. But I've always found to be very masculine and a good looking trait. I think most people would agree, but there's some people who do not like it. And I guess that's me being perhaps a little cosmetic and superficial, but it's almost like when someone's competing, I'm like, yeah, you look like a borderline ice addict. But at some point, before you get to that point, I'm like, it looks good. It looks sharp. It looks clean. And I always use the example. I say, hey, look at your parents when they were in their 20s, get some photos and look at them now in their 30s, 40s, wherever they are. They will have a more definitive jawline. Usually you just lose a bit of fat around the face. But I think that's a good point to know. Moving on or dovetailing from that, I don't know if it's worth now talking about the Bolt methodology, or before we do, I'm hearing some audiences screaming about Wim Hof. It would be an absolute disservice if we didn't mention this, and perhaps it's not going to be what people expect, but obviously he's come into this space, well exposed, well marketed from his stunts that he's achieved and done and continues to do. I've read his books. I understand it for the most part, but I think it's a little out of context. So I'd love for you to talk about him, his methodologies, and perhaps some of the principles behind what he's saying and where that fits actually in the hierarchy of the breathing, because I think a lot of people kind of just jump in and think that they can do things that they perhaps shouldn't be doing, and they don't understand the difference between what the cold exposure does versus the breathing element, because I think they're two separate entities that do correlate, but at the same time they are in different silos. So run wild and run free with that question, please, sir.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Wim Hof is that it's, you kind of look at it just like any other breathing, is that it's almost like this kind of, namaste, as Jordan would put it, namaste in bed type of thing, right? And it's very, people see it as like a hippie thing, and obviously Wim Hof doesn't really do much to change that. Not to talk down on him. I think he's a fantastic dude, but yeah, I think it's the oxygen advantage and Wim Hof are two opposite things. So the oxygen advantage focuses on the buildup of carbon dioxide and living and competing in a carbon dioxide rich environment, whereas with the Wim Hof, you're really trying to get rid of as much carbon dioxide and kind of purge yourself of that as much as possible. So you're exposing yourself to high oxygen levels. So the main difference is that I think with other than the cold stuff, I think that there can be a benefit. I can't speak to the cold therapy. I've seen research that supports it. I've seen research that debunks it. I honestly, I've never experimented with it, so I can't speak accurately to that. But what I can speak to is I think there can be a benefit of getting into a sympathetic state and then being able to come down from that sympathetic state. You obviously run into some dangers there, right? So if you start to, let's say you start to do some of the hyperventilation stuff, right? As you hyperventilate, some of that blood is the oxygen levels in being sent to your brain are reducing. Okay. Now that's where we get into something called the Bohr effect, where the Bohr effect is really one of those kind of first principles, just like RSA. The Bohr effect is something that you need to look at in a conversation of breathing. So the Bohr effect, essentially what it is that your body, in the oxygen that's attached to the hemoglobin in your blood, it's not going to be likely to release to the cells in your body without the presence of carbon dioxide. So if we don't have carbon dioxide in our system, it's not going to tell our body to essentially release that oxygen to the cells. So if you think about that, so we need carbon dioxide to release the oxygen. If you think about getting rid of hyperventilating and getting rid of as much carbon dioxide as you possibly can, your body's not going to get that signal to breathe. So it's not going to release that oxygen to your brain and your tissues. And yeah, I think there can be a benefit to it, but I think for the most part, you'd be better off focusing on an increased carbon dioxide state. So like I said, with the rhythmic breathing, right? If you spend more time exhaling than inhaling, obviously we're allowing that carbon dioxide to build up, which allows us to get the oxygen delivered to our cells more efficiently.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, and they can be something that it can be something that you use both of if you want to start your day. I mean, that can obviously get you going because you're getting into that very sympathetic state. But for the most part, I would say most of my clients, one, because I'm not trained in Wim Hof, but two, because I believe it's more important to live in a more carbon dioxide rich environment and get oxygen flowing, or get oxygen delivering to the cells efficiently. But yeah.
Sounds good. Now that makes sense. I think, does this have any, I guess, does this coincide with, and you were going to talk about the Bolt? Yeah. Is that a score or method? Does this correlate at all with the Bohr method? And is there a relationship between the two? And is there more to talk about on the Bohr method that's worth mentioning, or should we continue on with Bolt?
Yeah, I think the Bohr effect is one of those things that, as long as you understand that we need carbon dioxide and our body needs carbon dioxide, and it's really like we are always in the pursuit of like, oh, you need to take in more oxygen. You need to take in more oxygen. It's really kind of the opposite. And I think that's all you need to know, is that you need carbon dioxide in order to get that oxygen delivered to the cells properly, which it seems like an inverse relationship, but yeah, it's obviously important. Yeah. With the Bolt score, it's called Bolt because it's body oxygen level test.
Right. I was going to say, it sounded like it was an acronym for something again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a measurement that I use to track sort of changes in breathing over time. And that comes directly from Patrick McEwen and the Oxygen Advantage.
Right.
Essentially what it's measuring is our body's response to the buildup of CO2. Okay. So the general sort of procedure is you take a normal breath in through the nose, out through the nose, you pinch your nose, and then you grab your timer and you start it. And this isn't a test to see how long you can hold your breath. It's to see when your body starts to, snap you out of it and sort of tell you to take a breath.
Okay.
So you might have your throat might start to contract. You might start to feel like you need to breathe. Your diaphragm might spasm a little bit. And that's how you know when you got to stop the test. So a good Bolt score, like we're looking for ideally 40 seconds. That's what I train my athletes and breathing clients to get to. It takes a while to get there, but obviously that's kind of where we see the most benefit.
Yeah. Okay. This is a good parallel then to probably talk about other mechanisms to track this as of recently that I've been listening and learning. I have a couple of clients who have them, not that I'm endorsed or anything like that, but the Whoop. So I want to talk about that. I actually want to get your opinion on it. Obviously far superior to the Apple Watch, Garmin, other things, I guess to give some context, a lot of my clients who tune in will know, but for other audience members around the world, I did used to work for Apple, so no disclaimer there. But as phenomenal as the products are, and we are using some of them right now, the Apple Watch, based on the literature, it is not as accurate as we think it. And that's not me having a go. I just think people need to understand that, and like anything, take it with a grain of salt, guys. But I think when you're looking at things from a clinical perspective and a performance aspect, you definitely need some data and metrics and a calibration tool, which is a lot more accurate. Now, from what I can ascertain, the Whoop seems to be in the right direction. I'm not saying it's the be all and end all. So I do want to ask you, Brandon, if that is a tool that may be necessary or not, or if it's even worth a look or the investment, especially for those who want to get better insight and also are more on the athletic pursuit of performance.
Yeah, I think I don't have any hands-on experience with a Whoop band, but from what I've seen, it is pretty interesting, and it does kind of give you an idea of like how well you're breathing. I know one of the things that it does over the Apple Watch, at least I think I've got an Apple Watch right now, but again, like obviously it's got its limitations. I think the one thing that I think is very interesting is that the Whoop tells you your minute ventilation, or like your breathing rate, your respiratory rate. And that's something that, again, I talked about a little bit earlier, but that's kind of 10 breaths or 6 breaths per minute. So that's something that you can kind of strive for. And obviously, we don't have time to be counting, how many breaths we're taking per minute every day. It's just not realistic. So
exactly.
I think the Whoop comes in that sort of realm from a very interesting perspective, because it's not something that most people are looking at. And so like I said, I don't have any hands-on experience, but I think the Whoop, if you're really interested in tracking metrics and tracking some of those things, then I think that might be something worth looking into.
Yeah, me being more of a science nerd is quite interested in it. I love data. I wouldn't necessarily say it's, again, imperative that people get it. I've spoken to a client who has a lot of firsthand experience with it, which is really good. He's very, I guess, mechanistically minded like me, and he's had really good experience. From what I can see from some of the facts or the claims, I guess, is that it takes something more like 10,000 different analyses per minute or something like that. Don't quote me, rather than the Apple Watch. So it's more bespoke to that. But I think as well, it's quite seamless on the wrist, although it does take a bit of getting used to, but it's something that is designed to be permanently there, or for the most part, so it can actually take those readings. So I guess more research needs to be done. Because again, guys, not sponsored or endorsed, but definitely perhaps something to look at if you're really interested in that, I guess, performance or those extra percentiles, which could correlate to some feedback on, hey, you know what, I was a mouth breather. This is some of the scores. This is some of the readings. Now I'm becoming more of a nasal breather. Oh, okay, interesting to see some of the differences that might be happening, which could, even if the calibration's out, it could confirm, a bias that things are moving metrically in the right direction versus, oh, you know what, I'm not regressing. This is something that actually has merit. And just to use a basic example, I say to my clients all the time, I said, hey, look, the scales that you use, say, to track weight, and that's one metric, right? I said, even if those scales are wrong, because we'll never really know. We'll never 100% know exactly, right? Because say gravity's out, we've got the calculation wrong by, a mil or whatever it is, or whatever the metrics are. I said, it doesn't matter, because if we're using this consistently, that's the baseline. And therefore, if we can change the baseline over the time, it's the same with skin folds. It's the same with, strength. We know we're moving in the right direction. So that's all we need to know, because for all we know, today is Wednesday. Right? For me, it's Tuesday. For you, I believe. Well, hell, yeah, it could be Saturday. Maybe there's another day in the week. I don't know. But exactly. So I always sort of use these analogies, which are quite thought provoking. But I guess to steer it back on track, I thought that would be worth a mention. Brandon, do you want to talk about anything more before we, I guess, now apply this in more of a strength-based setting? I'd like to talk perhaps about intra-abdominal pressure, breathing, and how these benefits, apart from, again, some of them that you've alluded to, are beneficial for strength-based athletes or physique athletes in general, and even people who just want to improve their body composition, and how you would perhaps use to get specific coaching cues with your clients, so people can actually understand, okay, this is kind of the process, and obviously different metaphors, different definitions for different clients, but I guess giving us a bit of an insight to what that looks like.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I would want to touch on that before we get into the topic of like strength training or training in general, is this idea of locomotor respiratory coupling. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Again, LRC, another fantastic 3-letter acronym. Gotta love those.
Yeah.
Essentially, essentially all that means is that we as humans can break apart our breath cycle from gait cycle. Okay. So if you look at a horse, right, a horse or any other, I believe every other quadruped mammal, every stride they take, they're taking a full breath. Okay. Now we as humans can separate that. So we can take 10 steps while holding our breath if we want to, but quadruped mammals can't do that. So if you think about that and you laterally apply that to the training and apply, maybe the strides instead of strides, it's reps.
Makes sense.
Okay? So we can do reps without having to take a breath every single time. So yeah, that's the preface. We'll get into some of your questions on like the training in general, and then I'm going to definitely be talking about that as we go forward.
Yeah, no, that's quite important.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, I guess, breathing in general for training, strength and conditioning. Perhaps we can silo it into, your big compound movements, more powerlifting style versus, your more isolation versus functional, or when we start to move from, anaerobic activity to more aerobic activity. And how a question that I always get, I teach people to create intra-abdominal pressure. I define the core. I teach people to create a neutral spine. All of these little basic things, which a lot of, unfortunately, personal trainers are not taught and they're not aware of, which I think is some of the differences between strength coaches. They are simple. And I always come at it from a perspective of, hey, often we're doing less, not more in this movement. Your joints are all over the place, and we're just trying to create stability and mobility by understanding these fundamentals, but doing it in a way is very simple and progressive for clients over time. They go, oh, actually, that feels a lot better. I'm like, yeah, right, because we're just working with our physiology. So perhaps you could even start with warming up if there's any merit to that in terms of a breathing that coincides with dynamic stretching, mobility, activation work. I'll give you the floor. You can direct this, drive this however you want it, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, starting from that warm up, like you said, that's kind of where everything starts. I think we need to have a rule around nasal breathing, especially when it comes to exercise, and that is that anything submaximal, especially like your warm up, should be done through nasal breathing. Obviously, when you get into maximal effort, like say, athletic performance, that's when you might need to, if you're working maximally, you might need to alternate between nose and mouth. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But for recovery, obviously, just start to reduce some of that, reduce the rate at which you're breathing. But yeah, for warm up, start as much as you can breathing through your nose. Yeah. And then we look at, so for training itself, I always look at the exercise in itself. So obviously no two training sessions are going to be quite the same between, coaches. But if we're looking at, like, let's say the squat or the deadlift or the bench press or whatever, let's look at the squat. So the squat is, it demands a lot of internal stability, right? Like you've got this weight, it's moving in free space. You have no control over it really, other than how well you're able to squat. For something like a squat, that's where you would want to focus on, like you said, intra-abdominal pressure. So when I cue a client to squat, essentially what I'm doing is I want them to take a breath in through the nose, and I want them to have that full diaphragmatic expansion. So you should have lateral expansion of the rib cage and posterior expansion of the rib cage. So you should be creating a 360-degree breath, essentially, in your ribs and your lower back. And then that is how, that's what's going to dictate, that intra-abdominal pressure. Okay. And holding that breath while you complete the reps. And then we get into some more of the, the machines or the externally stabilized implements. So like if you're on a hack squat per se, that's where, you might not need to breathe every single rep because, the machine's going to take care of that for you. Whereas in a squat, your core is obviously on trial a lot more.
Yes. I think that's a good illustration there when we talk about intra-abdominal pressure, when you come at it from that perspective of, like you said, it's a circumference of breathing into the diaphragm. When we look at weight belts, this is something that really grinds my gears because, we have the weight belts that a lot of what we see powerlifters use now, which is generally the same diameter, circumference, and thickness all the way around.
Yeah.
But that kind of alludes to why we breathe, or why we should breathe the way we breathe, right? To create that same distribution of pressure all the way around. Now, obviously, there's the old school weight belts, and a lot of people wear them for fashion, and we won't go down that track. But sometimes when I'm explaining this as well to people, they are not, initially, they're not aware of it. Like, oh, well, why wouldn't I use this? I'm like, well, it kind of defeats the purpose of almost, you better wear it backwards because it's not creating that distribution. If anything, it's going to bias it, more towards, the abdominal section rather than the back. And I think for sure we should always start. And for people listening who perhaps, they've got the knee sleeves, they've got the shoes, they've got the belts, like, guys, this is really good, but let's learn to use the body first. And then use that as an additional extra and not rely on it, because I do believe that, I guess to slay a misconception for anyone that does believe this, but I'm quite confident that most people are not in this space that it will change the circumference of your waist. It certainly won't, unless there's evidence I'm not aware of. But again, if you're wearing a weight belt which is constrictive, I use kind of, I guess, a past analogy where corsets were worn for females, can actually cause damage over time to those internal organs if it's really, really tight. And I think you're sort of telling your body, hey, we've always got this support. Perhaps we don't need to activate, the abdominals or, the TVA, the core, the things like that more. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that, whether that's to do with equipment. But if so, I just thought that was an interesting segue, which really illustrated the point of why we would have the weight belts the way they are. And whether that changes in the future, I'm not sure. But I remember the first time I used one from, a good strength coach who showed me, I was like, this is horrible. It feels terrible. He's like, trust me, you'll get used to it. And now it's like second nature in these big movements. But I thought that was interesting. I thought I'd just throw that in.
Yeah. I think the weight belt itself, like, I think it has its benefits, right? I think when you're at that maximal load, that's where a weight belt could come in handy, right?
Yeah.
But, training your body, most of the time, if you're going to be training around that like 60 to 80% or so, where, you should really be trying to use your body to its fullest potential. At least that's the way I look at it. I'm not shitting on, weight belts themselves. I think, again, like I said, they have their utility, but I think, we're kind of bypassing the body and its natural ability to brace and support the spine and whatnot, and handle loads, right? Like, you have a natural weight belt in your system, in your body. So why not default to that rather than defaulting to this, kind of external support, which, whether they work or not, I think they do. I think we need to remember that.
Yeah.
The body. Yeah.
100% agree. Again, it's a band-aid, one of those things. It's like people are kind of putting the cart before the horse. It's like, let's start with the basics and use the tool when it is necessary and not rely on it. Because like you said, those words you aforementioned, that's exactly what I say. So you've already got an inbuilt weight belt. So let's learn how to use it. Let's define us what it is. Bang. Okay, great. You know what? And then later on, you still love this strength training. You love this. You want to work up. You want to do some heavy loads. Great. I'll tell you when to use a belt. But right now, Let's keep it simple. I guess to dive more into the training aspects, is there any other, I guess, key learnings, coaching cues that you use with clients for breathing? And this could be more in the rehabilitative space as well, prevention and cure, or it could even be more performance. And you can feel free to use real life examples if you want, of some clients that you've worked with recently or in the past that perhaps illustrate and get a point across as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing with any sort of rehab or training situation is that you need to really work on the paced breathing, right? Like we talked previously about parasympathetic versus sympathetic. If you've got an injury, chances are your body's pretty pissed off and it's pretty sympathetic. You gotta calm yourself down, and that will allow you to recover faster, because obviously rest is important, and breathing obviously plays to a certain degree to that. I think that when I look at I don't think you can really prevent an injury from happening, but as long as you can get some of the basics down, I think you're obviously going to be in a better position to handle more as an athlete or a client. So more specifically, always, like I said, with the warm-ups, you should always be sort of pacing your breath and trying to reduce your respiratory rate, right? And if you can get more sympathetic, recovery is going to be a lot easier. Sleep is going to be a lot easier with that. So if you can reduce your heart rate, if your mind is going, focusing on your breath and concentrating on that will help you sleep better, help you recover better, help you perform better, so on and so forth.
Yeah, makes sense. And I know we've covered quite a lot, and there's probably so much more to cover. I'm just keeping an eye on the time before we get on to some more rapid fire questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's been super insightful for me. I've got a lot to think about and take away, and I'm excited to implement a lot of, I guess, these nasal breathing techniques. What are some, I guess, key resources? You've dropped some names and obviously the studies that you've had for people that want to learn more, aside from learn from yourself. And feel free to please drop in your links here. We will obviously revisit this at the end as well. But who are some of the key people in the industry to follow versus, because there's obviously a lot of minutiae out there. There's probably a lot of people who are, like any industry, they are using the names and using the buzzwords, and they're perhaps not teaching good, authentic knowledge. Who are some of the leaders? Now, the reason I ask this is I'm quite big into reading these days.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the Oxygen Advantage. Now, there was also, and I'm just going to bring this up, excuse me, on the media, a friend sent to me. It's on my to read list, and I'm just going to bring it up. And I think it's called Breathe as well, by James Nestor.
Yeah.
So I don't know what books or resources you would recommend, but I'd love to get your recommendation, not only for myself, but also for people listening who want to dive deeper into this.
Yeah, I think those are the two that are the most probably prevalent right now in the breathing industry, that I think are actually useful in this sort of sense. So yeah, the Oxygen Advantage, obviously that's kind of, I'm sort of biased towards that. I think every system has its downfall, but I think what they're putting out is some of the best knowledge out there. And then James Nestor, I just finished reading that book, and he includes some different takeaway breathing exercises as well. But he also gives a sort of a background of like why it is that all of this stuff is important. And he's kind of the example that he's a reporter, I think, and he just sort of found an interest in this, and he wrote a book on it, which is fantastic. Another one that is coming out, I think Patrick McEwen is coming out with another book. I think it's called the Breath Cure or the Breathing Cure, something like that.
Right.
I think it's coming out in February. I would say I haven't read it yet, but I could imagine that he is one of the leading experts in breathing, so something like that I'd be interested to look at. But yeah, those are the main resources. Some of the people to follow, obviously, there's myself. I put out a fair amount of breathing content here and there. I kind of mix it up with training and breathing, because I'm not just the breathing guy. I also do train. I am a strength coach, so I do train clients. But I think there's some other people. I know Jordan Shallow. He talks a little bit about breathing as well. Obviously, he's a fantastic resource. I love that guy. And then there's some other people, like I think Bill Hartman and Zach Couples. So those are the other two that come to mind. And Pat Davidson, I think he has some breathing stuff. It's not his focus, but I think he talks about it in one of his books. So, yeah.
No, for sure. There's quite a bit to go out there. I know there's a few things on my reading list and a few people to, I mean, there's so much, isn't there, at the end of the day? And you've got to sort of have a bit of a list and create a bit of time every day, because you've just got so much mental fortitude before it all comes to a little bit of a close. Yeah. Before we get into the rapid fire questions, Brandon, I want to give you the floor, metaphorically speaking, the space, the internet space we have. To take the opportunity to talk about anything else that you think is prevalent. I think that point at the end, yes, you are a strength coach. I don't want to try and silo you too much to just be the breathing guy. I guess that's obviously been an area of interest and the main theme in this podcast. And again, as referenced before, perhaps this is for round 2, but if you do want to talk more about anything along those lines, or if it is more on the strength-based side of things as well, before we wrap up, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We kind of covered most of the main topics that I think people should start looking into or start researching or start implementing in their lives. I think, like I said, I'm not just the breathing guy, but I do take pride in integrating that with training as well, because I think it needs to be integrated. I think something as, we talk about primal movements, or like the squat, the hinge, the push pull, whatever, lunge. I think breathing is one of those primal movements that we just don't talk about. And I think, in training, it's very important to apply. But other than that, I think we couldn't really go down any other routes without having this podcast be 3-4 hours long. So I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, 100%. The return on investment on those elements is really huge, especially as a strength coach, to continue adding strings to the bow that are actually, relevant to the art of coaching and strength coaching in general. So no, I appreciate it. And thank you again for extrapolating. You've definitely whet the appetite for more. I know for myself, and a lot of people listening will want to know more. So I appreciate that. And obviously the links or some of the resources you've mentioned, and we'll get to yours towards the end in a moment. But the rapid fire questions, they're a bit more fun in nature, a little bit more lighthearted, although they are relevant.
Yep.
So the first question that I would ask, and whatever comes to mind, is if you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why? And it could be anything.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think a superpower, I think flying. I think that's a kind of a default one. I think that'd be pretty awesome, because, you could go where you want, when you want, stay in the air if you want, even when you're in times like this where COVID's obviously restricting airflow or air travel. You can go where you want, when you want, and see the world. And there's no real limit there.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think this next question is a really good add-on to that then, which is a really nice question to ask in times where we are a bit restricted. And this is, if you could wake up anywhere in the world tomorrow, perhaps by flight, where would it be and why?
I think Italy. I think I've never been. I haven't gotten a whole lot of travel. I've just been working on school and, doing that stuff for a lot of my life, and then focusing on a career. But I would I like the lifestyle. I think, pasta every day, pizza. I think it's a beautiful country, for at least from what I've seen. And I think that's where I'd want to wake up.
Great answer. I can confirm my mom is Italian. It's an amazing place. I spent many years there, and the pizza and pasta is like their fish and chips in England. Yeah. It's just what you do, and the food quality is just absolutely divine. As well as, like you said, the culture is very relaxed. Obviously, there's pros and cons, but yeah, highly
Wine,
recommend. Highly
wine.
recommend.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, wine. That's another one.
you can't go wrong. Interesting fact, though, as well. Excuse me. Is that apart from, I believe there's a demographic in Japan, but also Italians generally live quite long on average. And you look at their diet and you go, oh, yeah, but it's the qualitative element to the food, but also they're very stress-free people.
Yeah.
They're very passionate. They get a bit like, whoa, but it's all smoke and mirrors. And I think that has a lot, without going too much on a tangent now, a lot to do with the longevity. Like, you look at the traditional lifestyle over there, you get out of the main cities, you very much see, where my auntie lives is in a smaller town. It's just food, it's culture, it's connection, it's just movement, relaxing, spending time. It's all of those things that fill the cup, proverbially speaking, up of what we should do in life, where I guess more in the Western world, it's not Western, but we're always so like work and stress and eating in front of screens, and we're just forcing it, where really it's like, those guys really, to a degree, they've got it right in many respects. Yeah, there might be a little bit more work ethic is needed. But they're taking the time out to really enjoy life, which is a kind of a full circle conversation there. It's where we started with it. And very underrated, very underrated. The simple things in life are the best, guys. They really are.
I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't have said it better myself either. Like, that exact kind of mentality and lifestyle is like what I enjoy. Obviously, it's so hard to get that over here, but yeah.
There's a lot of merit to that, and I think, and you will discover this when you go. Things will open up again. That for me, it's a bit of a wake up call. It's a bit of a really big dose of. I was very happy over there. My cup felt very full. I was like, why is this? And like, yeah, okay, I've been there many times. So like, I can separate the holiday, period, honeymoon period. But it's like, okay, I'm eating really quality food. Mm-hmm. There's no stresses at the minute, right? Especially for that period of time. You're, dancing with people, you're connecting with people who are passionate, you're drinking, great wine, great liquids, you're eating really good quality food, you're getting sun, there's history, there's culture. And it just proves that, again, people know I've said this a million times, but health and relationships are at the core of happiness. If you've got that, you really do have everything. Because some of those people, they don't have much, but they've got their health, they've got their relationships, and they're just so happy. And you're like, there it is, the proof is in the pizza. In this scenario. My last rapid fire question, a little bit more thought provoking. So if you could write a social media post, you can have a picture, you can have some words, more, I guess, maximum length of an Instagram post, but every single person would see this on social media. You have the best marketing in the world. You get one free ticket. It's going to get on Facebook. It's going to be on Instagram, Twitter, TikToks, all of the whatever it is people are doing these days. And everyone's going to see this. That's on social. What is the message? What is the picture that you would deliver as of now? What would you want people to know?
I got asked something similar on another podcast, and it was I think I'm going to kind of default to that. And I think it would just be, stop worrying so much and start like actually, living and enjoying your life. I think, there's a quote by Mark Twain that I really enjoy. I actually just gifted one of these. It was a little reminder coin to someone in my family, but it's worrying is like paying a debt you don't owe. Right. Mark Twain said that. And I think that really resonates with me because I've always been a pretty laid back person. And I think, now more than ever, I think obviously I have to acknowledge my privilege in this situation. I have it pretty good. And, despite having a closed down, country and province here in Canada, there's a lot to worry about. But I think accepting that, you only have control over what you can control. And I think that's the thing that I would put out there is just take some time and, worry about what you have control over and nothing else.
I love it.
Yeah,
Love it. Definitely strikes a chord with me and my philosophy, and also always wonderful to listen back to wiser minds with more experience in history that have changed the world. A lot to be learned.
for sure.
And my final question, Brandon, that I ask all my guests is, can you identify a fear in your life? It can be past, it can be current, that you're working on or you have overcome, and what you learned from that fear?
Um, I think I'm not afraid of a lot. There's nothing external to myself that I'm afraid of. Um, I think something that I've worked on probably the most, and I don't know how well of a speaker I am. You guys being listeners, you can judge me on that. But I think being in you know being in a public situation where I'm forced to talk and formulate thoughts well, and I think confidence plays a lot into that. I think being a trainer and being a coach has made the biggest impact on my life in that situation, because you're forced to talk to people and you're forced to like build these relationships with people, and I think it's extremely rewarding. I think that's the most I think I've gotten out of this career in this industry, is that the connections you can build with people. Doesn't matter if you're online, doesn't matter if you're in person. It's like you have a human in front of you, and just that interaction is beautiful in itself. And I think that goes back to kind of the Italy talk, is that just you get to forge these great relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
People communication is,
yeah,
very, very critical. And I don't think technology will ever outweigh that human element, even if we do live in a technological world which is ran more by AI and robots. I think people will crave even more the humanistic element of touch, of communication, of interaction and acknowledgement. And look, I think you've done an absolutely superb way of articulating yourself with concepts. You speak very well. I know I've learned a lot. I'm really grateful that I'm able to speak with people like you and all around the world. And again, technology is allowed to supplement and enhance the human element of communication. So no, I thank you again for sharing, Brandon. I think you're doing, some tremendous work in the space, hence why I reached out to you. I've really, really genuinely enjoyed this chat. It's definitely given me more insight and takeaways, and I am very confident that everyone on the other end of this microphone or earpiece, wherever you're listening, is also nodding along as well. Before we wrap it up, where can people find you, more about what you do, your courses, your coaching, and all of the above? Please plug away, my friend.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation we had, and it's we talked about training, we talked about breathing, but we also talked about life, and I think that's what it's all about. I think having that human element is a very real part and shouldn't be shied away from. But in terms of where you can find me, I pretty much live exclusively on Instagram. I don't really have anywhere else to plug, but my handle is Brandon.Schultze, so SCHULTZE. That's pretty much exclusively where you'll find me. Yeah, so whoever's listening, reach out, please start a conversation. I am more than happy to talk breathing, training, anything with you. So thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And make sure to head over there, everyone. As always, I will put those links in the description below, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's Spotify, iTunes, as always, wherever you're listening on your favorite media platforms. Brandon, thank you once again. An absolute pleasure indeed, and a great way to summarize what's been a very thought-provoking conversation. For everyone listening, I will ask a small favor, as always. If you are on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, comment with anything that you thought was valuable. Perhaps you've got some questions, queries, concerns. It all helps. Make sure to share it around if you enjoyed it. Taking that extra minute to do it. Don't be selfish. Share the knowledge with someone else. It really does help the channel grow and get this information to more people. And of course, if you're on Spotify or iTunes, and it is safe to do so, you're not driving, you're not on a bike, I would encourage you to take a moment to leave a rating and a review, because it's not just about the feedback. It's about, again, raising those views. And it really helps when we get that feedback, so more people can perhaps perhaps get onto this knowledge too. So thank you, as always, everyone, for listening and tuning in. And of course, until the next episode, stay fearless.